The wind howled across the snowy plains. Carrying ice sharp as knives, the human, named Jaren, trudged carefully over the frozen ground, his boots crunching with every step. He was searching for scrap metal and old parts to fix machines in his small workshop. The cold bit at his fingers, and snow drifted into his eyes, but he kept moving. Focused on survival, in the distance he saw a small figure huddled near a broken crate. The figure shivered violently, and the snow had stuck to her ragged clothes. Jaren squinted, trying to make out who or what it was. As he came closer, he realized it was an alien girl. Her skin pale and frost-covered. Her eyes wide with fear and cold, she held out a small, worn bag and whispered, "Human, I only have $2. Let me sleep somewhere warm. Please." Jaren froze for a moment. Unsure what to do, he had seen strangers before. Some good, some dangerous, and the galaxy was not kind to those who trusted too easily. His instincts told him to walk away, yet something about her trembling form and scared eyes made him pause. There was desperation in her voice, and he could feel it like a weight pressing on his chest. The girl tried to take another step forward, but she stumbled in the deep snow, her teeth chattered, and her small hands shook uncontrollably. Jaren felt a twinge of pity. He dug into his pocket and found a piece of dried bread he had saved. Holding it out to her, he said, "Eat this, but stay back. I don't know if it's safe yet." She looked at the bread, then at him, and slowly moved closer. Her eyes full of cautious hope. Around them, the wind carried distant sounds. Something moving in the snow. The planet was not empty, and predators or scavengers might be nearby. The tension grew as the girl shivered violently. Her voice barely audible as she thanked him. Jaren wanted to help, but he was also aware that danger could strike at any moment. He had learned to survive, and survival meant making choices carefully. After a long moment, he finally spoke. "Follow me. But don't touch anything until I say so." The girl nodded eagerly. Grateful, her legs were weak, and she stumbled again. So Jaren reached out to steady her. He noticed her clothes were torn and dirty, and her small bag looked almost empty. Her presence was strange but familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He led her to a small fire pit he had made outside his workshop. The flames flickered weakly, but they gave some warmth. He motioned for her to sit near the fire, wrapping a thin blanket around her shoulders. She shivered less now, but her fear was still clear. "What's your name?" Jaren asked, trying to break the tension. I'm Lyra," she whispered. "I ran away. I have nowhere else to go." The night was dark, and the wind grew stronger. The small fire struggled against the cold, and shadows danced across their faces. Jaren watched her closely. Ready to defend her if something attacked, he didn't know if he could trust her, or if she could trust him. Yet, in that frozen moment, a small connection formed between them, fragile but real. The alien girl with only $2 had stepped into his life, and neither of them knew how much it would change. The fire flickered weakly against the dark night, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Lyra huddled close, trying to keep her small body warm. The human Jaren sat a few feet away, carefully adjusting scraps of wood to feed the flames. The wind outside roared like a wild animal. But here, near the fire, there was a fragile sense of safety. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, her lips chapped from the cold. You really let me stay?" she asked softly, almost afraid he would say no. Jaren shrugged, not meeting her gaze. "Don't get used to it yet. You need to earn it by surviving the night," he said. His voice low but not unkind. She nodded, understanding that survival meant rules, even here, even now. She noticed how his hands moved with careful precision as he adjusted old metal scraps. Sparks flying in the firelight. Jaren was not just a simple human. She realized he had skill, patience, and something. Protective, watching him work made her feel a strange comfort, as if this frozen, harsh world might not be so dangerous after all. "Why are you alone?" Jaren asked, breaking the silence. I ran away from bad people," Lyra whispered, hiding her face in the blanket. They wanted me to work. And I had no choice. So I left." The words were short, but the weight behind them was heavy. Jaren's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing at the thought. He didn't know who these people were, but he knew they were cruel. And cruelty on this planet was deadly. The fire crackled, and small sparks floated into the air. Lyra reached out instinctively to warm her hands. Jaren noticed and tossed a few more pieces of wood into the fire. The warmth slowly reached her fingers, and her lips curved in the slightest smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling not only from cold but relief. He nodded once, still silent, but his eyes softened. A silent agreement that she could stay a little longer. Outside, the shadows moved, shapes hidden by snow and night. The planet was alive with danger, and Lyra's presence made Jaren more alert than ever. Every snap of ice underfoot made him tense. But he did not show it to her. He wanted her to feel safe. Even if the world was not safe at all, this was a delicate balance, trust and survival intertwined. Lyra tried to eat the bread he had given her earlier, her hands shaking as she took small bites. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. I have only $2, she said. I don't have anything else to give." Jaren shook his head. "Money doesn't matter here. Survive the night first," he said. His words were simple, but they carried meaning. Protection was more important than wealth on a planet like this. They sat together in silence, letting the fire fight the cold. Lyra's gaze wandered to his workshop, noticing old tools, broken parts, and scraps of metal piled everywhere. She wondered what he built, what he fixed, and why he lived so alone. Her curiosity was natural, but she did not speak. Sensing that asking too many questions might seem like distrust, hours passed slowly, the wind howled, and the fire burned low, yet, for the first time since she ran. Lyra felt a small spark of hope. She was not completely alone. And perhaps, with this human, she could survive. The night was far from over. Dangers still waited beyond the firelight. But near it, a fragile trust was forming, delicate, yet strong enough to keep them both awake and alert. The snow had slowed to a quiet drift, covering the ground in a soft white blanket. Jaren worked carefully on a broken mech arm near his workshop. Sparks flew as he welded pieces together, the smell of hot metal mixed with the crisp night air. Lyra sat nearby, wrapped tightly in the thin blanket, her eyes wide and curious. She watched him quietly, amazed at how focused and skilled he was. Every motion of his hands seemed precise, controlled, as if he could fix anything in the universe. She leaned slightly forward, forgetting for a moment about the cold. The firelight reflected in her eyes, making them shine. Jaren noticed her gaze out of the corner of his eye, and he looked up briefly. His expression was calm but guarded. He had seen her curiosity, but he could not yet fully trust her. He returned to his work, the sparks dancing like tiny stars. Lyra's fingers itched to touch the tools. To understand how they worked, she had grown up in hardship, never learning skills like these, but instinct told her to watch, to learn. She had a soft smile on her lips. Almost unnoticed by Jaren, he adjusted a bolt, wiped his hands on a rag, and then glanced at her again. Their eyes met briefly, and for a second, something unspoken passed between them. A fragile connection, a small trust forming. The wind outside carried strange sounds, distant howls, and the scraping of metal against ice. Both of them paused at the noises, tension rising. They knew danger could appear at any moment. Predators, scavengers, or worse, might be watching. Jaren placed a hand on a nearby metal pipe, ready to defend. Lyra's heart raced, but she did not move, trusting him to act. The suspense in the night made the quiet moments feel long and fragile. After a while, Lyra dared to speak softly. "Your hands?" "They are strong," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Jaren did not look up immediately, but then he said, "They have to be. If you want to survive here," his voice was low. Carrying experience and warning, she nodded. Understanding that this planet demanded skill and courage, she felt a strange admiration for him, not just for his strength, but for his calm in the face of danger. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small, worn cloth. "I can help clean your tools." "Maybe make them better," she offered, her hands shaking from cold and nerves. Jaren studied her for a long moment, uncertainty crossing his face. Then he nodded slightly. "All right. But careful," he said, handing her a small hammer. "One wrong move, and you'll hurt yourself." Lyra accepted the hammer with a serious expression, wanting to prove herself as she worked quietly, fixing small scratches and polishing metal. Jaren observed her, noticing determination in her movements. She was more capable than he first thought, and perhaps she could survive more than just the cold. The night continued, quiet but tense, every shadow outside reminding them of the dangers still lurking. Yet inside the circle of firelight, a small bond grew. Fragile but real, hours passed and the stars above shone bright in the frozen sky. Lyra looked at Jaren again, curiosity and something warmer in her gaze. He glanced at her briefly, then back at his work. Neither spoke much. Yet they communicated silently. Through the shared work and stolen glances, a trust began to form. A trust that might be enough to survive the night and the dangers waiting beyond the firelight. The night grew colder, and the wind picked up speed, swirling snow into high drifts that rattled against the walls of Jaren's workshop. Lyra huddled closer to the small fire, shivering as the cold pierced through her thin clothes. The human noticed her discomfort and frowned. He had lived on this planet for years and knew storms could be deadly. The first real test of survival was approaching. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, blotting out the faint light of distant stars. The wind howled like a pack of wild animals. Shaking the workshop's thin metal walls, snow whipped across the ground, forming small waves that crept closer to the door. Jaren's instincts screamed at him to secure the place. He motioned for Lyra to stay close. "This storm will be bad." "Stay near the fire," he said, his voice steady but serious. Lyra nodded, her teeth chattering. It's worse than I've ever seen," she whispered, hugging the blanket tighter around her. Jaren's eyes scanned the horizon, looking for weak spots in his shelter. He grabbed old sheets and pieces of scrap metal, fastening them over cracks and holes. Trying to make the small workshop as safe as possible, the storm could easily blow through, and they both knew it as the wind intensified. Snow began to seep under the door, and small icicles formed along the edges of the workshop. Lyra watched him work. Amazed at his knowledge and speed, she wanted to help. But the tools were heavy and sharp. Jaren noticed her hesitation and handed her a small brush to sweep snow away. "Careful," he said. "One slip could hurt you." She took it carefully, sweeping in slow, precise strokes, wanting to prove she could help. The storm raged around them, drowning out all other sounds. The fire flickered dangerously, and sparks flew into the blowing snow. Lyra moved closer to Jaren, feeling the heat on her cold hands. Will it be okay?" she asked, voice trembling with fear. Jaren placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "If we stay smart, yes," he said. "We survive storms like this all the time. His confidence was reassuring, even if the storm outside made their hearts race. Suddenly, a loud crash shook the workshop. Snow falling from the roof. Lyra gasped, frozen in place. Jaren moved quickly, propping a heavy piece of metal to hold the roof steady. The storm outside seemed alive, pushing against them. Testing their strength and courage, Lyra realized how fragile their safety was, and how much she depended on him. Her admiration for him grew. Tempered by fear, hours passed slowly, each moment stretching longer in the storm's fury. They took turns near the fire, warming cold hands and drying wet clothes. Lyra noticed small details about him, the way he moved with careful precision, the way he never panicked, and the way he silently watched her. Making sure she was safe, a sense of trust grew between them. Fragile but undeniable, finally. After what felt like an eternity, the storm began to ease. The wind losing strength and the snow falling softly again. Lyra let out a small sigh of relief, leaning against Jaren. Exhausted but safe, he looked at her. Tired but satisfied that they had survived, the first storm had tested them both, showing them the danger of the world outside, but also the small warmth and protection they could find together. The bond between human and alien girl had grown stronger, forged in fire, snow, and survival. Asterisk. The morning after the storm, the world was quiet and covered in thick, sparkling snow. Lyra rubbed her cold hands together, watching Jaren move around the workshop, fixing broken tools and checking the metal walls for damage. He worked silently, his focus unbroken, but the tension from last night still lingered in the air. The storm had tested their survival, but now a new challenge was coming. One neither of them had expected. Lyra hesitated near the door, her small bag clutched tightly against her chest. She had been thinking all night, wondering how she could repay this human who had protected her, who had risked everything to keep her safe. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Jaren, I can give you something, she said softly, her eyes wide, filled with nervous hope. He glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. Something? He asked, wiping his hands on a rag. His voice was cautious, not curious. He had learned to distrust strangers, even those who seemed innocent. Lyra nodded. Yes. It's not much, but it could help. Or at least it could be useful to you, she whispered. Her fingers trembling, she opened her bag slowly, revealing a small, glowing crystal pulsing faintly with light. Jaren's eyes widened slightly, and he leaned forward, careful not to touch it too quickly. Where did you get this? He asked, suspicion and surprise in his voice. Lyra's hands shook as she explained, I found it near the ruins. I didn't know what it was. I thought it might help someone like you. She looked at him, hoping he would understand that it was an honest offering. A dangerous one to possess, yet a gift of trust. He studied the crystal carefully, noting its faint energy and unusual glow. He knew such objects could attract attention, dangerous attention, from scavengers, bounty hunters, or worse. His mind raced. Calculating the risk and reward, he looked at Lyra, seeing the hope and trust in her eyes, and for the first time, he felt a small smile. It's powerful. But it's dangerous, he said. Do you understand that? Lyra nodded quickly. I do. I only want to help. To repay you for last night. Her voice was small but firm, showing courage she didn't feel inside. Jaren sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. I'll keep it safe, but you must promise me one thing, he said. Locking eyes with her, stay close to the fire and follow my instructions. No matter what, she nodded again, swallowing her fear, willing to obey. The air around them seemed to shift as he carefully placed the crystal in a reinforced box, locking it with makeshift metal clasps. Sparks flew as he secured it, and Lyra watched every move, realizing how much he cared, not just for the object, but for her. The small gesture of protection reminded her that trust was growing between them. Delicate but real, outside, the wind picked up again. A reminder that danger was always near. Lyra shivered slightly, but this time from anticipation rather than cold. She realized that survival on this planet was more than just warmth and food. It was about understanding trust, courage, and the risks they had to take together. Jaren looked at her and gave a small nod, as if acknowledging that she had passed an invisible test. They were no longer just two strangers sharing a fire, but allies facing the dangerous world outside. The sun rose weakly, barely piercing the thick clouds that still hung over the frozen land. Lyra pulled her blanket tighter, shivering, though the fire in the workshop kept her somewhat warm. Jaren had spent hours checking every wall and every tool, making sure nothing from last night's storm could endanger them again. But even as he worked, a feeling of unease settled over him. Like a shadow creeping closer, Lyra noticed his sharp gaze. The way he paused and listened to every sound outside. "What is it?" she asked quietly, her voice small, almost scared. Jaren didn't answer immediately, instead moving to the small window and peering out through the snow-dusted glass. He saw faint tracks in the fresh snow, too deliberate to be animals, too large and deep to belong to a child. His eyes narrowed, calculating. The shadow was coming closer, and it was coming fast. He moved to Lyra and whispered, "Stay close. And don't make a sound." His hand was firm on her shoulder. Steadying her trembling body, Lyra nodded, her small hand clutching the blanket, trying to appear braver than she felt. Jaren grabbed a small, sharpened pipe. Holding it tightly in one hand, his eyes fixed on the door, waiting for whatever was approaching. Outside, the wind carried faint, metallic sounds, like claws scraping against metal. Each sound made Lyra's heart beat faster. But she did not move, trusting Jaren completely. The shadow had come before, and he had survived. So she had hoped that they could survive too. She peered through a crack in the wall, and her eyes widened at what she saw. A figure tall and dark, moving silently over the snow. Its movements were deliberate, almost hunting. Its eyes glowed faintly red, and it paused as if sensing them. Jaren whispered again, "It's waiting. We need to be ready." He gestured for her to stay low. Hiding behind the fire, the workshop suddenly felt small and fragile, like a fragile shell against the predator outside. Lyra could feel her pulse racing, her small body tense, ready to run or fight, but she stayed, knowing the human beside her was more capable than anyone she had ever met. The figure moved closer, shadowing the workshop. And for a moment, it stopped, tilting its head, listening. The snow beneath its feet did not make a sound. And yet, Jaren could feel the danger, sharp and immediate. He adjusted the metal pieces around the door, preparing a makeshift barricade, while keeping his eyes locked on the shadow. Lyra clutched the crystal she had given him yesterday, knowing it might be the only thing that could protect them. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through the cracks in the workshop, rattling the walls and scattering small tools across the floor. The shadow flinched outside, then moved again, circling slowly. Testing their defenses, Lyra held her breath, feeling every heartbeat echo in her chest. The world outside had never felt more dangerous. Yet inside, the fire kept them alive, and Jaren's presence kept her calm. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity as they waited, the shadow never leaving the perimeter, just watching, hunting, assessing. It was a game of patience, of waiting without moving. Waiting without breathing too loud, Lyra's small hand brushed against Jaren's arm, and he gave her a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise that he would not let anything harm her. Together, they waited, knowing that when the shadow finally made its move, they would have to act fast or lose everything. *. The shadow waited silently, circling the workshop like a predator. And then, without warning, it struck. The door rattled violently as the figure slammed against it, the metal frame bending under its strength. Lyra screamed, clutching the blanket around her, and Jaren leaped forward, holding the sharpened pipe tightly, ready to defend. The creature's glowing red eyes scanned the small interior, its breath cold and harsh. Freezing the air around them, Jaren swung the pipe, striking its leg with a sharp clang. And the shadow hissed, recoiling but not retreating. It was faster than he expected, and its strength was immense. Each movement it made sent splinters of wood and scraps of metal flying, making the workshop feel like it could collapse at any moment. Lyra ducked behind a workbench, her heart pounding, but she could not look away. The fear in her chest battled with her curiosity. She had never seen anything like this before. A predator that was almost supernatural, yet real and deadly. She gripped the small crystal tightly, remembering the trust they had built yesterday. Hoping it might somehow help, Jaren struck again, aiming for the shadow's glowing eyes. And for a moment, it faltered, letting out a low, rumbling growl. Lyra noticed sparks from a broken tool fly into the creature's face, distracting it slightly. "Now, Lyra," Jaren shouted, and she understood instantly. She pushed a small pile of scrap metal toward the door. Creating a barrier, the shadow lunged but tripped over the obstacle. Giving them a small advantage, the battle continued. The workshop shaking with every blow. Snow blew in through the broken cracks, covering the floor in a thin white layer. Making footing difficult, Jaren moved like lightning, striking when necessary, dodging when required. And keeping the creature away from Lyra, she watched his strength and skill, realizing just how much she had underestimated humans. He was not just strong, he was smart, and that made him dangerous to their enemy. For a moment, the shadow retreated slightly, circling outside the door, its red eyes never leaving them. Lyra took a deep breath and whispered, We can't just wait." Jaren nodded. Understanding her fear, "We have to end this, or it will come back stronger." He grabbed a metal rod, swinging it like a hammer, striking a weak spot he had noticed earlier. The shadow screeched, staggering back, and Lyra saw the first sign of defeat. Using the moment, Lyra pushed a crate toward the door, hitting the creature with full force. It stumbled again, and Jaren followed quickly, striking at its leg with all his strength. Finally, the shadow turned and fled into the snowy forest. Leaving a trail of deep footprints behind, the workshop was battered and broken. But they had survived. Lyra sank to the floor, shaking with adrenaline and fear. You saved me," she whispered. Her voice small, almost awed. Jaren crouched beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "We saved each other," he said simply, looking at the damage around them, knowing the next threat could be even worse for the first time since she arrived. Lyra felt a mix of fear and trust, knowing that the frozen, dangerous world outside was not the only thing she had to survive. She had Jaren by her side, and together they might just make it through. Whatever came next, they would face it as allies, as a team, as a fragile, growing family in the cold, harsh world. The morning after the attack was quiet, but the silence felt wrong. Lyra sat near the fire, trying to warm her numb fingers, her eyes darting to every shadow in the workshop. She had survived the first attack, but she could feel that something else was coming. Something she could not see. Jaren moved silently, checking the walls and the door, every broken piece of metal, every crack in the wood. His face was tense, his eyes sharp, watching for even the smallest movement. "The shadow was only the beginning," he said quietly, almost to himself. "There are others. Things that follow it." Lyra shivered. Not sure if she wanted to hear more, a faint noise came from outside. soft but deliberate, like footsteps over ice. Lyra froze, her heart pounding. She pressed closer to Jaren, hoping the warmth of his presence could keep the fear away. He knelt beside her, listening, then, with a sharp nod, he whispered, "Stay behind me." "This one is clever. It hides, it waits." Lyra watched as he moved to the window, peering through the snow and broken glass. At first, she saw nothing, just white snow and frozen trees. But then she noticed a faint shimmer, like heat. Like a small creature melting into the cold, Jaren's eyes followed it, narrowing. "It's not alone," he said. "There's something hiding. Waiting for us to make a mistake." She wanted to run, wanted to hide under the blankets forever. But Jaren shook his head, his hand firm on her shoulder. "We can't," he said. "We survive by facing it." Not running, Lyra took a shaky breath, gripping the small crystal tightly, remembering how it had helped before. Outside, the hidden threat shifted, moving silently, circling the workshop like a ghost. The snow around it barely moved, but Jaren could sense its presence. He grabbed a length of rope and a few metal tools, preparing traps, each movement careful, deliberate, while Lyra watched, learning, hoping. Understanding the danger they faced, hours passed as they set up simple but clever defenses. Small spikes hidden under snow, tripwires made of metal scraps, and barriers that could slow the creature down. Lyra worked beside him, her hands numb, her movements clumsy, but Jaren corrected her gently, teaching her without words, showing her how to survive. Then, a sudden movement caught their attention. A shadow slipping closer under the frozen trees, its shape indistinct, but its eyes glowing faintly in the cold light. Jaren motioned for Lyra to hide behind a crate, her small body pressed against the wall. Breathing slowly to stay calm, the hidden threat paused, sensing the traps, sensing them, waiting for the perfect moment. Jaren whispered, "It's testing us. It's patient. But we have patience too." Lyra's small hands trembled as she gripped the crystal, hoping the strange glow would help them again. She realized that this was not just a battle of strength, but a battle of wits, patience, and courage. The hidden threat might strike when least expected, and they had to be ready. The sun dipped low behind the clouds, casting long shadows over the snow, and both Jaren and Lyra understood that night would bring the real test. The hidden threat was patient, relentless, waiting for a mistake. But together, they would not be easy to catch. The fire between them burned bright, a fragile shield against the cold and danger outside. Asterisk. The sun disappeared behind the frozen mountains, leaving the world in a pale gray twilight. Lyra shivered as the cold deepened, wrapping her thin blanket tightly around her. She had survived storms, shadows, and the first attack. But the night always felt different, darker, and full of secrets. Jaren moved quietly around the workshop, checking each barricade, each trap, making sure nothing could slip past them. His eyes scanned the trees outside, every shadow, every glimmer of movement. His body was tense, ready for anything. He glanced at Lyra, who watched him nervously, her hands clenched. "Stay close. And don't move too fast," he whispered, his voice low but steady, outside. The hidden threat stirred, slipping silently over the snow, its red eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It moved carefully, avoiding the traps, testing their strength. Its patience was endless, and it seemed to know exactly what to do to make them afraid. Lyra felt her heart race, her small body pressed against the wall. She had never felt so aware of every sound, every breath, every flicker of movement. Suddenly, the shadow lunged at the workshop, faster than they expected, snow spraying into the air, sending a cold wind inside. Lyra screamed, but Jaren was faster, swinging the metal rod with all his strength, striking the creature as it tried to smash through the door. The blow rang out like thunder, and the shadow recoiled. But it was not defeated, only slowed, and it circled again, waiting. "This is it," Jaren whispered to Lyra. "We have to act together." He handed her a small flare, glowing bright. "When I say now. Throw this and stay behind me." Lyra nodded, her small hands trembling, but she understood. Her trust in Jaren had grown stronger with each danger, and now she had to prove herself. The shadow paused, sensing their movement, its glowing eyes scanning for any weakness. Jaren gritted his teeth and swung a heavy metal pipe, smashing a part of the barricade. Snow and wood flew everywhere, and the creature hissed. Stepping back for a fraction of a second, Lyra took that moment and threw the flare toward the shadow. Its bright light exploded in a burst of fire and sparks. Startling it, Jaren charged forward, striking the shadow's leg with all his strength. And this time it stumbled badly, nearly falling into one of their traps. Lyra watched in awe as he moved with speed and precision. Like a predator hunting a predator, she realized that human courage was not just strength, but strategy, intelligence, and timing. The shadow roared, a sound that shook the workshop. But it finally retreated, disappearing into the frozen night. Leaving a trail of deep footprints behind, Lyra sank to the floor, her body trembling from adrenaline and fear. You did it?" she whispered. Looking at Jaren with wide eyes, he knelt beside her. Placing a strong hand on her shoulder, "We did it," he said simply. "Scanning the dark forest outside, but don't relax yet. The night is still long, and there may be more." Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of his words. But for the first time, she felt a strange warmth in her chest, knowing that together they had survived the night. The fire in the workshop burned bright, a fragile shield against the cold and darkness outside. The first light of dawn crept over the frozen mountains, casting long, soft shadows across the snow. Lyra stepped outside the workshop, her breath visible in the cold morning air. She looked around cautiously, half expecting the shadow or some other danger to appear again. But for now, the forest was silent. Peaceful, almost gentle, Jaren came beside her, his eyes scanning the trees one last time. Making sure the threat had truly gone, he looked tired, his muscles aching from the long night of fighting and waiting, yet his face was calm, steady, a quiet strength that made Lyra feel safe. "It's over. For now," he said, his voice low but firm. And she believed him. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. Her small hands trembled as she realized how close they had come to losing everything. She looked at Jaren, and for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear, something warm and steady. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft, almost shy, "for saving me." "For staying," Jaren smiled faintly, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You helped too," he said simply. "You stayed calm, you learned. You faced the night with me." Lyra looked down. Embarrassed but proud, she had survived storms, shadows, attacks, and the hidden threat. And now she understood that courage was not about not being afraid, but facing the fear anyway, together. They returned to the workshop, inspecting the damage, repairing what they could with tools and scraps. Each nail, each piece of metal felt like a victory, like a step toward reclaiming their small sanctuary in the frozen world. Lyra worked beside Jaren, learning, asking questions, slowly gaining confidence in herself and her abilities. Outside, the snow sparkled in the new sunlight, each flake shining like a small promise. Lyra paused and looked at the forest, imagining the shadows that had chased them. And she realized they had not only survived, but they had grown stronger. "I was so scared last night," she admitted quietly, "but I feel different now." Jaren nodded, understanding. "The night teaches us many things," he said, "but the dawn? The dawn is where we see what we've learned, what we've earned." Lyra smiled faintly, feeling the truth of his words, the cold, the danger, the fear. It had all brought them closer, forged a trust that was stronger than any shadow. Stronger than any storm, she moved closer to him. Not afraid, not trembling, but steady. And for the first time in a long while, she felt safe, truly safe. "I trust you," she said simply, and it felt like a small, shining victory. Jaren looked at her, his expression softening. "And I trust you," he replied. "That's why we survived." The sun rose higher, warming the workshop and the snow outside. The frozen world seemed less dangerous now, less cruel and more alive. Lyra and Jaren stood together, looking at the light spreading over the mountains, understanding that they had faced the worst and had survived. Together, as a team, as friends, maybe even as something more. The danger was not gone forever, and the shadows might return. But for now, they had the dawn, they had each other, and they had trust. The frozen stranger who once needed warmth had found it. And the human who once had only caution had found something he never expected. A bond that could not be broken, even in the coldest, darkest night. Asterisk.